Hello, we are talking about my favorite thing. Ultimately, this is the Living in Fort Collins YouTube channel where we talk about everything there is to know about Fort Collins. But specifically, once a month, every Tuesday, we go live to talk about the real estate market. And, you can't talk about Fort Collins without talking about what a wonderful place it is to live and where are you going to live in a wonderful house. And how do you get a house? By working with the real estate agent. So my team and I, brokers, we've got 7 of us, but we'd love to help you if you're considering relocating. And this will give you some good information to make those decisions by. And specifically today, we are going to talk about something that's been in the news a lot lately, the NAR settlement, as well as stats, figures, and really specifically around supply and demand. I think ultimately that is kind of where things start and stop. And we'll get into that here shortly. But interest rates and affordability are ultimately, huge things that are driving affordability in and buyer demand. We originally were expected to see 6 to 7 rate cuts that the Fed themselves suggested that we're going to have in 2024. We are through March without a single rate cut. And now the expectations are maybe we're going to see 3 rate cuts the rest of the year because inflation just isn't really coming down where we are hoping to see it. Now, throughout this video, definitely ask questions and I will answer those as we go and at different segments. So this is why we do it live, is so that while we're giving this information, you can ask questions and we will give some information on that. Let's see here. Actually, we got a couple questions right away. Who do you think is most accurate for house prices between HomeBot, Zillow, and Redfin? Ooh, interesting. I think a lot of those, depending on if the house has sold and how many houses have sold in the neighborhood and how accurate the HomeBot is. I do like HomeBot if there is a CMA that supports it. So you can ask your agent to submit you a kind of an updated CMA that will give an updated figure to HomeBot, and then it'll base it off that from the market activity. Zillow, same thing. If there hasn't been a house sold, sometimes those houses don't pick up that there's a finished basement like mine. My house was sold in 2016. We then finished the basement, but Zillow's estimate for it is based off of a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2,000 square foot house. My house is now a 6-bedroom, 3.5-bathroom house for about 3,500 square foot finished, 500 square foot unfinished. So I think between those, it just matters how much information is going in there and also how much sales are happening in those neighborhoods. So good question. Do you think the business will shift to a listing agent only model where dual agency is the norm? Great question. Let's jump into that right now. The NAR settlement. Essentially, that was kind of the big deal over this last few weeks. Essentially, what happened was there was a few home sellers in Missouri who sold their house, decided they weren't super excited about having to have paid after the fact. Buyer agency got together, created a class action lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors, RE/MAX, basically Berkshire Hathaway Home Services of America, and a few other big ones, Keller Williams. And billions of dollars worth of money is flying around. Specifically, the National Association of Realtors just recently settled. And part of that settlement were a few components. So let's go through those real quick. $418 million settlement to be paid over 4 years from NAR to this to the plaintiffs. And the lawyers are going to get paid quite nicely from all of this. But the other dynamics of it, not monetary, but were some practices that they are wanting to see the National Association of Realtors change within their business models. So the compensation will be moved off of the MLS. Now, offers for compensation could be made to buyer agents off of the MLS. So like people's websites, made a direct call to the listing agent and from the buyer's agent. Hey, we're representing a buyer. They're interested in your house. What is the compensation that you were offering? But they can no longer be offered on the MLS. And what they're suggesting is that this could potentially allow for more competition, negotiation, and things of that nature. And then the second part of that will be written buyer agreements before showing homes. So there are exclusive buyer agreements. And before you as a buyer agent could show that individual a home, there needs to be a buyer agreement in place with a set fee, or whether that be a flat fee or percentage that isn't open-ended, stated in that buyer's agreement. So if I'm representing a buyer and we agree that I'm going to represent them for 2.5% or 3% or 2.25%, whatever that is that I negotiate with them, and talk to them about, our value and things of that nature and why we're going to get paid what we're going to get paid, that buyer will be required to pay that amount of whatever that fee is, whether it's flat, fixed, or a percentage based. And then it would then be negotiated into the offer that is made for that property. So let's say I call the listing agent and they say, hey, we're offering 2% to a buyer's agent, and my agreement with my buyer is 2.75%. There's a 0.75% delta that either we are going to need to negotiate into the contract, whether it be through seller concessions or seller concessions to the buyer, or that the buyer pay directly to the buyer's agent, but there will be a 0.75 delta in there. So your question was, do we think that it will go to more of a listing agency only model? Well, possibly. It's definitely possible that buyers couldn't afford to pay out of pocket that 0.75% in that specific example. And so that buyer might just go unrepresented and go directly to the listing agent. And that listing agent would then probably have a agreed upon dynamic with their seller that says, hey, we generally offer, let's say here's an example. We'll do 6%. We will take 3% as the listing agent. We will offer buyer's agents 3%. But if we represent both sides, we will do 5% for you. And in that situation, a buyer would come directly to us. Hey, we're representing both sides. Seller gets to save 1% on their side of things. We have a pre-negotiated rate that if we represent both sides, we do that with the seller. So I do think there could be some increased unrepresented buyers, but there's been some different stats out there as far as the comfort level of buyers these days. And the average first-time home buyer is 36 years old. Now, I definitely think they have a lot of life experiences. And when they're making $500,000 decisions, 87% of those, now this is from Bright MLS, but 87% of respondents suggested that they would want buyer representation when buying their first house. And I mean, I would too. I could go down a list of reasons why that is. I think when there is that dual agency that you were kind of suggesting, I think there could be advantages to seller, disadvantages to buyer, in the sense of, hey, when we're going through inspections these days, depending on what the offer was, depending on where everything is, we know relatively well that we can either negotiate more during that inspection because, hey, we're walking through the house and that furnace looks like it's ancient. That water heater looks pretty old. They don't have a radon system, and we're going to get an inspection. And because of how many deals that we do, we pretty much know that if the radon tests high, we can press pretty hard against that seller to add in a radon system, which is about $2,000. Whereas possibly if you're working with a listing agent, is that kind of like where you're saying dual agency, or in Colorado, it's a transaction broker. They're going to be a transaction broker and not an advocate for you as a buyer. And they will just tell you, hey, whatever you want to put in your inspection objection, go ahead and do that. And if you are unknowing or afraid that you're going to lose a deal because, like I'm going to show you here shortly, buyer, demand and supply and demand are a little bit tight right now. You're afraid, hey, they're going to just tell me to kick rocks. Whereas the reality is, being a buyer's agent, we know that with certainty, if they don't do the radon with us, they're going to have to do it by themselves, because they're going to have to disclose moving forward that the radon tested at 14.0 picocuries, and either they're going to have to fix it or the next buyer. So there could be some money on the table. So I do think having advocacy as a buyer is where a ton of value adds in. Additionally, we had a client that was looking at buying $1 million property. There was an open lot behind it. That house went under contract in a couple of days with multiple offers. And Little do those buyers know, I'm sure, because I do think there's a discrepancy of the information that buyers get. But the lot behind them is a lot that's owned by Deal and Doug's dealership, Doug Deal and dealership. It's a car dealership. And this is an acre lot, $1 million property facing out over the mountains that is going to potentially have a car dealership right behind it. And I would say we didn't even go look at that house and moved on to the next one because we did our research. We're like, could you imagine having, over the loud horn, hey, Susie or John, your car is ready in Bay 5, come pick it up, while you're out there having a beer on a Saturday night? Personally, I think that's where some value is added. But I do think financially, there are going to be some buyers who just truly can't afford to pay for a buyer's agent, whether that be through having to make up that delta between what the listing agency is offering or what the concessions are and what they can actually afford to pay out of pocket. And so I do think between that or lots of different reasons, there could be a bigger population than is today that will be unrepresented. And I do think there will be some commission compressions. We're kind of seeing it already. Historically speaking, 3% was pretty much the norm. I'm seeing a lot more 2.8s, 2.75s, 2.5s. I'm seeing a lot of 3% still for buyer agencies. And I think that there are going to be agents that separate themselves with value and others that don't and have really looked at, riding that gravy train for the last few years and might get off that gravy train because they're going to actually have to start doing some work. But I think that's a great question, and hopefully that clears it up a little bit. These changes are expected to take place in the middle of July. So a lot of this is kind of theoretical, hypothetical. What is actually going to happen is yet to be seen because, hey, listings are ultimately, why we talked with my team about it today. Why do listings sellers offer a co-op fee to a buyer's agency? Well, a lot of buyers are working with buyer's agents, and it's an enticement for buyer's agents to bring their clients to this property. Maybe there's 4 properties, all of them exactly identical. If one's offering 3%, one's offering 2.5%, one's offering 2%, let's just say everything apples to apples, same exact location, same neighborhood. Which one am I going to press harder to sell my buyer? Probably that one with 3%. So as a seller, having that enticement of 3% just got your house sold versus the other 2 on the market that might have been offered 2.5% and 2%. Additionally speaking, we talked about my team today of we could also see that, hey, offering whether that be 2.5% or 3% or 2% as a listing agent to a cooperating buyer's agent could then financially allow that buyer to buy that property. Because, hey, before I can even show properties now, I have to go sign an exclusive buyer's agreement starting in mid-July that has financial agreements in place. And if I say, hey, I don't work for less than 2.75%, or I don't work less than 3%, and this buyer is very tight, so really the only properties that they can afford are where they can either offer a seller concession to pay the buyer's agent, or there's already an agreed upon co-op fee from the seller with the listing agent to the buyer's agent. And so there's kind of a two-headed monster now, not just on the marketing side, but financially, you might disallow buyers to look at your property because they've already agreed upon paying their buyer's agent. And if you're not allowing that to happen, they might just say, well, we're putting 3.5% down conventional loan. We've got closing costs, and really that's all that we can afford. So we can't afford to pay you. So we have to move on. Or, there might be some after the fact negotiation with the buyer's agent if that's the perfect home and, hey, it makes sense for everybody to do it. I think that could absolutely happen. But all of that being said, it used to be that it was just for marketing. Hey, let's bring buyer's agents in. Let's help them sell our house to their clients. And now there's a potential financial responsibility. And then again, everything ultimately gets down to that net. Whew. So we are through the NAR settlement, but definitely feel free to reach out, ask questions about that. Appreciate you guys already asking questions. And we'll dive into it as needed. But let's look at some of the market statistics. And we will look at, we're really going to focus today in on supply demand. So right here, homes for sale in blue, new listings red, under contract yellow, closed sales green. So homes for sale, purely inventory, right? So we've seen in, let's go a little bit smaller. We've seen in June, in 2020 and 2021, we saw this inventory really start to plummet. And that's where prices started to skyrocket because there's just no homes on the market. New listings really have stayed relatively consistent over the last 5 years. We dropped in 2023, end of 2022 and 2023. And that's because sellers generally had a 3% or 4% mortgage. And a lot of new listings are going to come from people moving up, selling their first house, buying in their second house. But we saw new listings dramatically decrease from historical, trends because, well, they had these golden handcuffs on. And under contract, that kind of came right here and spiked up a little bit in 2020, 2021. And then we're kind of coming back down 2023 and 24 to kind of more a normalized level for like 2019. So we had this inverse. We had new listings staying consistent, homes on the market drop, and then homes under contract spike in 2020, 2021. But now we're seeing it actually drop quite a bit. Our demand is dropping because of interest rates over these last kind of 18 months, as well as closed sales. So that's kind of the supply and demand issue that we are seeing. But let's look at homes for sale and then versus 1 year ago. Again, this is directly looking at inventory. So 2019 into 2020, COVID happens. Homes demand spikes because interest rates drop to 2.5 to 3%. So our homes on the market, our inventory plummeted. It is picking back up, and we're seeing, a little bit closer to 2020, 2019 levels, still a little bit below 2019 levels. But our homes for sale versus 1 year ago, we are seeing quite a bit of a spike because we're comparing to such a low number in 2020 and 2021. So, but versus over this last year, we're kind of seeing it normalize, maybe a little bit of an increase, but nothing too crazy. New listings. Now, this is where it's super interesting. New listings are now, granted, they kind of fluctuate between that 25% and less than 25%. But all of that being said, it's amazing how quick listings increased in summer of 2022 until the end of 2022, when interest rates started to really peak up. And, we did start to see a fair amount of new listings come onto the market. Right in here, we started to see new listings come onto the market, kind of peak out over here. And we saw a decent amount of inventory. We saw from a half month to a month and a half worth of inventory really pretty fast. So my history in real estate, I was like, man, it's going to take a while to get to, a balanced market of 6 months, but it can happen relatively quickly. And then, under contract, this is what's crazy. So we saw 2020, this is COVID right here, right as soon as COVID happened. I mean, we saw a plummeting of homes that were under contract, and it was just because people were terrified. But then interest rates went down to 3%, 2.5%, and we saw these huge increases in homes under contract versus 1 year ago. And it's kind of decreased as interest rates increased, and now we're kind of getting back to a more normalized level versus 1 year ago, because interest rates have been at about 6%, 6 to 7% over the last year. So for buyers, buyer demand, they're kind of seeing, hey, this is kind of here to stick around. I'm not even going to show this because it's honestly pretty confusing. But we're going to jump into home sales price. So month over month, or, we're seeing 625 versus 590. That's to be expected. We seasonally demand happens. April happens. We have prices drop during the winters. But what I want to show is the rolling 12-month average over the last 5 years. We're starting to see this flatlining. Recursion to the mean is what somebody helped me with last year. We saw this huge spike during COVID, and then this really flatlining over the last really 18 months or so, almost 2 years of the rolling 12-month average, right around that $620,000 price mark. And I think we're going to see that moving forward, because we do have this kind contraction of buyer demand, but also new listings, as we saw, were down. Let me make sure you guys can see what I'm showing. You guys didn't see that. Let's get you guys my screen. You guys didn't see what I just showed you. Let me get back to there. There we go. All right. Hopefully you guys can see this better now. Like, it looks like we can see it. There's a lack of demand here. I'm going to answer you in just 2 seconds. So sorry. I'll start over from what I was just saying. We'll go month over month. Month over month, we're up from 590 to 625. But what I wanted to show you guys is that rolling 12 month. We've kind of flatlined over the last 18 months. And that recursion to the mean is kind of where historically since the 70s, we've seen 5.5%. But, here we are seeing almost 15 to 20% for almost 2 years. And so we're going to see this flatlining, what I think, for a good long while, unless interest rates plummet or some sort of new buyer program happens and we see huge increases in demand. I don't see a huge decrease in demand and increase in supply, which would then help prices go down. But we will see. That's kind of the pressing issue. There was a question. Does the lack of demand due to mortgage rates make it advantageous for cash buyers? And if you have a sell house first, does it balance out still good market position? So let me see. If you have to sell a house first and then buy a house cash, that's a great position to be in. Now, granted, I would say my recommendation would be to sell that house, ask for a post-closing occupancy of 30 to 60 days, or go look for a short-term rental, have that cash in your pocket. And then being able to offer cash is absolutely advantageous right now. It's just, we got a deal that recently, actually we're going to close tomorrow. That is, it's a cash deal. It was newly on the market. There was actually multiple offers and we still got that property for under list price. So I do think cash does have an advantage, but if you have to sell your house first and it's contingent, if you want to buy and your house is contingent, the purchase is contingent on the sale of your house, it definitely is less advantageous, because what we'll talk about here shortly is kind of the what our feelings are of the market, not necessarily the facts, the hard facts, but from our company and how much business we're doing. We can talk to you a little bit about some experiences we've had as a company, some listings, buyers, all that kind of stuff that kind of gives an anecdotal analysis of the market. So, but what we'll want to also look at is days on market. Rolling 12-month average, we are seeing that increase, but on a month-to-month basis, it's definitely decreasing. That's to be expected again, because we're getting into the spring buying season. It's just a ton of buyers start coming out of the woodworks, looking for homes, get into that house before the summer begins and close. But we are also seeing listings sit. So it is definitely something worth mentioning and looking into. Now, I want to talk kind of more anecdotally in the sense of some of the kind of deals that we've seen as a team. Right now, a lot of demand, existing homes are, can sit unless they are priced right and turnkey ready in a great location. Those homes are going to get offers and potentially multiple offers depending on their pricing strategy. A house that needs work, that might not necessarily be in the best location or might be too aggressively priced, is going to sit and have subsequent price reductions. New builders, new construction homes, they are offering some really pretty great incentives. So their inventory, they are, pushing the pedal to the metal, within reason, of course, but offering, buyer incentives, lender incentives, and buyers are able to kind of time their purchase a little bit better on these new constructions. So, a few deals. We actually got one deal under contract that was that we were contingent on the sale of our home. We weren't the highest offer, but we showed the most interest on the front side. As soon as the house went on the market, we submitted an offer. They didn't expect necessarily multiple offers, but the seller wanted to wait through the weekends. They did ultimately get multiple offers, but because it was a close enough deal, they said, you guys were first in line. You guys have shown interest throughout the weekend. We are going to go with you. A new construction, the incentive was $30,000. We got our client basically $54,000 through negotiations, and then also competing lenders, compare and contrast. We submitted an offer where it was under list price, sitting on the market for 120 days. We did a pretty aggressive offer, and the seller was very stuck on their number. It was a divorce situation, and I think we had competing interests. And so while the house was sitting on the market for over 120 days, they weren't really ready or willing or wanting to do as big of a reduction as we felt was necessary for that house to sell. We're working with multiple buyers right now, looking on the market. And, I think ultimately the houses, we're considering making an offer on a house today, just recently came onto the market, extremely well priced, extremely well maintained. Within the first 12 hours, the seller received an all cash offer. The showings are going to be ceased after today. We may offer, we don't know how well we're going to do, but this house was in a great neighborhood, great price, turnkey ready. So it shows that those types of houses are very much going to be desired and offered on. Whereas a house, we've got a listing that, all of the major components are nicely updated, but the actual interior cosmetics needs to be updated. And the way that I talked with my buyers and sellers is this. We're at 6.5% interest rates, 7% interest rates. And these individuals are already having to come up with, let's just say $25,000 as far as a down payment minimum to buy this house, and then closing costs, and are going to have a pretty high mortgage payment for the first few years, if not longer, if interest rates don't come down. And they just don't feel comfortable doing that and then having to make a pretty sizable investment on renovations. They'd much rather, instead of buy a $500,000 house and have to put $50,000 into it after close, they'd rather buy that $550,000 house, finance all the renovations that have happened, and move on from there. So, it's definitely a dynamic market, lots of things moving. There's homes sitting, there are homes selling, location, readiness, and marketing definitely are a big factor. But hopefully all of this information is helpful. Fort Collins real estate market, I think the real estate market in general is just extremely dynamic now. There's changes taking place, technology coming in, the NAR settlement, NAR settlement, supply and demand, kind of differences. We've got interest rates that were expected to come down, but haven't yet. And there is just, it's a really exciting time just because, hey, lots of things are happening. And so it keeps you on your toes. And that's where I think working with a buyer's agent who's very active in the market is important, because, hey, you might go to that builder and they might be offering $30,000 and you might just say, hey, that sounds great, let's take it. Or you might be able to get in that extra $20,000 plus $5,000 worth of lender incentives. So, it's just a very interesting time. I'm very grateful to be doing what we're doing. We have an amazing team. We're working with clients from all over the country, from local to all over the country, and very grateful for everyone who chooses to work with Sukup Real Estate Services. So if you guys have any questions, never hesitate to ask. Leave a comment down below and I will make sure to answer it. But I appreciate you guys joining me live, and I'll hang around for a couple minutes before we take off. We're actually going to go do a walkthrough, and then we had a inspection today, but it's a lot. Let's we'll kind of go back in and look at the shared screen. Days on market again, that's just going to be, that's a little bit of a lagging indicator for inventory. As those increase, we will see, months supply start to increase, but it's just kind of leveling off. We did see, October of 2023 was the highs of interest rates. I think we got up to like 8.4%. And so, it was tough. We had a listing in a neighborhood where there was 6 other listings, and it was crickets. So you want to turn the faucet off to the real estate market. Yeah. Pump those interest rates up to 8-9%. And where prices currently are, you're going to see a pretty substantial and quick increase of inventory. But then we started to see interest rates kind of drop down. So demand kind of spiked back up. Right now we're just kind of seeing it level out. So very that's kind of it. And I don't see any questions on the channel. So I appreciate you guys watching. And until next time, have a great day.